The diner was half empty that Thursday morning when Tiana Carter stepped inside, tying her faded red apron around her waist. The small roadside cafe sat on the edge of a quiet New Hampshire town, known mostly for its coffee, blueberry pie, and the warmth of people who worked too hard for too little. Tiana, 25, had been waitressing here for 3 years. Her smile came easy, but her eyes carried exhaustion. She was tall, brown-skinned, and graceful even when tired. Between paying bills and caring for her sick mother, Tiana had learned that hope was something you had to make for yourself. That morning felt ordinary until the front door opened with a small chime. An elderly woman stepped in slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. Her silver hair was neatly braided, and her eyes scanned the room carefully. A younger man, sharply dressed in a gray suit, followed close behind, holding the door for her. He guided her toward a booth by the window, speaking gently though she gave no reply. Something about her stillness told Tiana that the woman couldn't hear. Tiana approached with her usual friendly tone. "Good morning, what can I get for you?" The young man smiled politely. "Hi. My grandmother's deaf," he explained. "I'll help her order." Then he began using sign language. Tiana froze for a moment, not out of confusion, but recognition. Her younger brother, Jordan, had been born deaf. She'd learned sign language before she learned to drive. It had been years since she used it often, but the gestures came back easily. She smiled and signed, "Would you like some tea?" The elderly woman's face lit up instantly. Her hands fluttered with joy as she signed back, "You know how to sign?" "Yes," Tiana replied with her hands. "My brother is deaf." The man looked surprised. "That's amazing. Not many people know sign language around here." "I'm Michael West, and this is my grandmother, Eleanor." "Nice to meet you," Tiana said warmly. "I'll bring your tea." As she moved to prepare the drink, whispers rose from nearby tables. "That's Michael West," one woman murmured. "The tech billionaire who bought that mansion outside town." Another added, "He's here. In this place." Tiana blinked in disbelief but shook it off. To her, rich or poor didn't matter, kindness did. She returned with Eleanor's tea and set it carefully on the table. "Real tea leaves," she signed with a wink. Eleanor's wrinkled face softened into a tender smile. She reached across the table, touching Tiana's hand gently, and signed, "You are very kind." Over the next half hour, Tiana checked in on them often. Eleanor asked simple questions through signs, about the town, about Tiana's family, about her life. The conversation flowed naturally, hands moving gracefully like a dance. Tiana rarely opened up to anyone, but something about the old woman's calm presence made her feel safe. "My mom's sick," she admitted when Eleanor asked. "Kidney problems. I'm saving up for her treatment." Eleanor's eyes grew soft with sympathy. "You are strong," she signed. "Don't give up." When the meal ended, Michael reached for his wallet, but Eleanor shook her head. She wrote something on a small notepad and handed it to Tiana. It read, "You made my morning brighter. Thank you." Folded beneath the note was a $100 bill. Tiana gasped and shook her head. "No, no, this is too much," she protested. But Eleanor only smiled and patted her hand again, signing, "For your mother." Tiana felt her eyes sting. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you so much." When they left, Tiana stood by the window, watching Michael help Eleanor into a sleek black SUV. She didn't care that he was a billionaire. What stayed with her was Eleanor's warmth, the way she looked at her as if she mattered. Over the next few days, Tiana kept the note in her apron pocket. Life went on the same way, long hours, small tips, and quiet prayers that her mother's condition wouldn't worsen. Still, she thought about the deaf woman who had signed, "Don't give up," with such certainty that it echoed in Tiana's heart. A week later, the diner door opened again. Tiana glanced up and froze. Michael West stood there, alone this time, holding a small box. "Hey, Tiana," he greeted with an easy smile. "My grandmother wanted me to bring you something." Curious, she wiped her hands and opened the box. Inside was a silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Kindness is a language the deaf can hear." Tiana's throat tightened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "She picked it herself," Michael said softly. "She said it reminded her of someone she once knew." Tiana traced the engraving with her fingertips. "Please tell her thank you. She didn't have to do this." Michael smiled faintly. "She hasn't stopped talking about you. You really made an impression on her." "Actually," he hesitated. "She asked if you'd visit her sometime. She doesn't have many friends who can communicate with her." Tiana hesitated. "Me? I wouldn't want to intrude." "You wouldn't be intruding," he said. "She'd love the company. And honestly, I think she could use someone like you." That night, Tiana lay awake staring at the bracelet, the words glimmering under the faint light. Something inside her told her this wasn't a coincidence. Maybe she was meant to meet Eleanor West. Maybe this was her chance to feel something beyond survival, connection, purpose, maybe even destiny. On her next day off, she took the bus to the grand estate on Riverbend Road. The mansion was breathtaking, surrounded by rose gardens and tall iron gates. Tiana felt small as she approached the front door, nervous that she didn't belong. But when the door opened, Eleanor's face broke into the warmest smile. "Tiana," she signed excitedly, taking her hands. "You came." Eleanor led her through a sunlit garden filled with blooming roses. They spent the afternoon together, sipping tea and sharing stories through signs, about family, about loss, about the small joys that made life worth living. For the first time in a long while, Tiana felt at peace. As the sun began to set, Eleanor grew quiet. She looked at Tiana thoughtfully and signed, "There is something I want to tell you. Something I have not told anyone, not even my grandson." Tiana frowned slightly. "What is it?" Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened a small wooden box beside her chair. Inside was a faded photograph, a young black woman holding a baby, smiling softly at the camera. The woman looked strikingly familiar. Eleanor looked at the picture for a long time before meeting Tiana's eyes. Then she signed slowly, "That woman was your grandmother." Tiana's heart pounded. She stared at the photo in shock. "What do you mean?" she signed quickly. "How do you know her?" But before Eleanor could reply, Michael's voice called from inside the house. Eleanor closed the box quickly, her expression shifting. She touched Tiana's hand gently and signed, "Not yet. I'll tell you soon." As Tiana left the mansion that evening, her mind spun with questions. She didn't know what to believe, or what Eleanor truly meant. But one thing was certain, this meeting wasn't a coincidence. Something deep and life-changing was waiting to be revealed. Tiana couldn't sleep that night. The image of the photograph lingered in her mind, the young black woman holding a baby, the same eyes and smile she'd seen in old family albums. Her grandmother, Ruth Carter, had passed before she was born, and her father rarely spoke about his past. But the resemblance was undeniable. Why would a wealthy white woman like Eleanor West have that picture? What did she mean by, "That woman was your grandmother"? The next morning at the diner, Tiana moved through her shift distractedly. She spilled coffee twice, forgot an order, and barely noticed the regulars teasing her about daydreaming too much. Her boss, Nora, gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "You okay, honey? You look like your head somewhere else." Tiana forced a small smile. "Just tired." But her thoughts wouldn't quiet down. Finally, after her shift, she made a decision. She would go back to the estate and ask Eleanor directly. She needed the truth, no matter how strange or painful it turned out to be. When she arrived that afternoon, Michael greeted her at the door. "Tiana, hey. My grandmother's in the garden again. She's been asking if you'd come by." Tiana smiled nervously. I hope it's okay I dropped in. Of course, Michael said warmly. She'll be thrilled. As Tiana stepped into the garden, she saw Eleanor sitting near the fountain, painting the roses in front of her. She looked peaceful, her hands steady, her eyes distant. When she noticed Tiana, her face lit up. You came back, Eleanor sighed happily. I had to, Tiana replied, sitting beside her. You said something yesterday, about my grandmother. I need to understand. Eleanor set her paintbrush down, her expression turning solemn. For a moment, she stared at the rippling water before signing slowly. Your grandmother's name was Ruth Carter, wasn't it? Tiana's heart nearly stopped. Yes, she signed back. How do you know that? Eleanor's eyes filled with emotion. Because she was my friend, my best friend, she signed carefully. We met when I was a young woman. I had just married my husband, a wealthy businessman. Ruth worked as a maid in our home. But she was more than that, she was kind, intelligent, and she had a voice that could make the world stop. Tiana's eyes widened. My dad used to say she loved to sing. Eleanor smiled faintly. Yes. She sang in the kitchen when no one was around. I was lonely back then, trapped in a marriage that felt like a prison. Ruth became my light. We would talk late into the night when the house was quiet. She dreamed of leaving and starting a life where she could sing freely. But one day, she disappeared. My husband said she left suddenly, without saying goodbye. I searched for years, but I never found her. Tiana's throat tightened. She moved up north, she signed. That's where my father was born. She never talked about her old job. I think, maybe something happened. Eleanor nodded, tears welling. Something did happen, she signed shakily. My husband was cruel. He treated Ruth terribly. I tried to help her, but I was afraid, too afraid to stand up to him. One night, she came to me crying. She said she was pregnant, and I knew the child wasn't wanted in that house. I helped her escape, gave her money, and told her never to come back. The words hit Tiana like a storm. She felt dizzy, her hands trembling. Pregnant, she signed. Are you saying? Eleanor reached for her hand. Your father was born because Ruth was brave enough to leave. I never saw her again, but I kept this photo she gave me the night she left, to remember her and the promise I made to find her family one day. Tiana's eyes flooded with tears. The truth crashed over her like waves. The woman she'd served tea to, the woman she thought was just a kind stranger, had known her grandmother, had saved her family. Eleanor squeezed her hand gently. I kept searching. When I saw you that day at the diner, I felt something familiar. You have her eyes, her strength. I knew in my heart who you were before I even asked. Tiana could barely breathe. Why didn't you tell me sooner, she signed weakly. Eleanor smiled sadly. Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me. People have hurt you enough, haven't they? Tiana nodded, her chest tight. All my life, I've felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I never knew where our family came from. But now, she trailed off, her hands trembling. You gave me a piece of my history. Eleanor's eyes softened. And you gave me something too, she signed. A chance to make peace with the past. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle splash of the fountain. Then Michael appeared at the garden's edge, curious but respectful. Everything okay? He asked. Eleanor smiled. Everything is better than okay, she said aloud through Tiana's translation. Later, as Tiana prepared to leave, Eleanor handed her a sealed envelope. For you and your mother, she signed. Something small, for the kindness you gave me. Tiana tried to refuse, but Eleanor insisted. Open it when you're home. That night, sitting beside her mother's bed, Tiana finally tore open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check, enough to cover her mother's treatment and more. Tears poured down her face as she read Eleanor's words. You reminded me that love doesn't need sound to be heard. Your grandmother once saved my spirit. Now it's my turn to help you continue her song. Weeks later, her mother began treatment. The diner regulars noticed Tiana's glow returning, her laughter more genuine, her energy lighter. She still worked hard, but life no longer felt like a battle. One quiet afternoon, she received a call from Michael. Grandma would like to see you, he said softly. She's not feeling well. Tiana's heart dropped. She rushed to the estate, finding Eleanor resting in bed, her breathing shallow but her eyes bright. Eleanor signed weakly, promise me you'll live fully. Be brave like Ruth. Tiana took her hand, tears falling freely. I promise, she whispered. Eleanor smiled one last time and signed, thank you for letting me find peace. She passed away that evening, leaving behind not just her fortune but her story, one that tied two families together across time, pain, and silence. Months later, Tiana stood beside Michael at the unveiling of a new community center built in Eleanor's name. A section of it was dedicated to deaf outreach and support, and another to a music room honoring Ruth Carter. Michael handed Tiana the microphone. You should say something, he urged. She looked at the crowd, her heart steady. I used to think silence was empty, she said softly. But now I know it's full of stories waiting to be heard. Eleanor West showed me that kindness connects souls stronger than words ever could. My grandmother sang to survive, and now her song lives on, through every act of love we share. Applause filled the air. Tiana looked up at the sky, whispering, thank you, Grandma. Thank you, Eleanor. And somewhere deep inside her, she felt both women smiling, one who taught her to listen with her heart, and the other who gave her the courage to speak her truth.